Cool. All right. Today is the December 1st meeting, and we have me in Rome and Caroline and Jeremy here. Oh, someone just joined. Hello.
Here, I'll take notes so you don't have to try to talk and type at the same time.
Okay. Hello, David. Okay. So today we have 3 things on the agenda. The first one is about SBOMs. The second one is about Porter's data service for outputs. The third one is about the state of the advanced dependencies. Does anyone have a preference which topic we dive in first, or want to speak up on one of
Can we start with SBOMs? Actually, yep. I think we have the most momentum on that. And we got Jeremy on the call.
Cool. All right. We can start on the SBOMs. I'm not sure. Caroline, do you want to start kind of introduction on this topic, or Jeremy, you want to take it?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of give an overview and
that'd be great.
See maybe where it can fit into Porter. So SBOMs, or software bill of materials, are a thing that's been emerging in the supply chain security space, and it's kind of like a list of ingredients for what, if you make a cooking analogy, it's not really a good analogy, but it's like what a lot of people have been doing. It's a list of things that go into your final product, right? You can use it for a few things like license checking. You can make sure that you're not deploying something that's GPL licensed, or maybe requires a license and you don't have a license for. You can use it for vulnerability scanning as well. So instead of having to actually assuming that they're trustworthy, so there's a lot of fuzziness around that right now, but assuming that they're trustworthy, you can use them for vulnerability scanning. It's a lot quicker than having to scan individual layers in a container. And they make it a little easier to just kind of search for things. So maybe you're deploying an application and it's Java based, and you have an SBOM for it, and it lists all the dependencies that are like in the Maven or the Gradle dependencies, and Log4j has another major CV or something that impacts it. The SBOM can give you that kind of record of what's being deployed. Excuse me. So there's a whole lot of ways you can deploy these things or build these things now. You can do kind of after the fact analysis. So I've got a pre-built image and I want to scan it and analyze it. Sift will do that for you. Gripe will do that. Trivy will do that for you. The SBOM tool from Microsoft will do that using Sift behind the scenes. There's a whole lot of tooling in that space. There's 2 kind of main formats, CycloneDX and then SPDX. SPDX is the one that's under the Linux Foundation, and I think has kind of the most traction behind it. The other way that you can do those things is kind of at build time, and I think that's the better way to do it. So when you're assembling something, you have access to all the things that are going into it. So instead of having to analyze after the fact where you might miss things, doing that kind of at build time is a more interesting, probably more complete way of doing that. Some tools like ChainGuard has a tool called APCO, which builds Alpine-based images. It's kind of cool, and it does it at build time for the image because it knows all the packages that are going to get installed. So it's looking at all of the Alpine packages or the Wolfie packages that they're going to use, and it includes them that way. Docker has added a plugin that's available right now that uses Sift. That's not really at build time, but what they are looking at doing is adding support, and it's an open PR right now. Let me drop the link into the document here. I think I have it open. They're working on adding support for generating attestations in the build process. So when a Docker build is happening, it knows what it's going to add. It's like which layers it's going to pull in, any external things that are going to get copied in. So it's better able to build that kind of SBOM. And I think that might be an interesting place to look at integration for Porter, because when you're doing the Porter build and you're assembling what that bundle looks like, I think you have that's a better place to hook in to try to figure out what those things might look like. So I have the document open here. Sorry, I don't have the document open. Give me 1 second. I'll drop it in.
There's a link in chat.
Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. Perfect. Yeah, I'll just drop the link in chat too, but then I'll drop it in the docs. So this is kind of an open thing. It's not merged yet, so it's not in build kit quite yet.
Okay.
It is active kind of development going on here. Oops, I'm not signed in.
Oh, don't worry, I got it. I'll add it.
All right, perfect. Yeah. So I think that's an area that there could be some investigation that happens. I think you could use SIFT right now to kind of analyze things after the fact, to look at what's in the invocation image and also like the bundle itself, try to analyze what's there. Maybe that's a good intermediate step. And I think that would also allow you to start looking at publishing those things alongside the bundle. Maybe that goes in the bundle, maybe it doesn't. But the SBOM is an artifact that'll come out of. It's not really a part of the bundle, but it's more like metadata about the bundle. So maybe there's some thought that should be done about where does that live? Does it live inside the actual bundle once it's been generated? Does it live alongside as metadata? I don't remember. I haven't kept track super well about how the spec has evolved, but maybe that's something that gets referenced from is the bundle JSON still a thing, or is there a?
Oh yeah, no, that's the thing.
Yeah, so maybe that's a thing that gets added to the bundle JSON that points to that. There's a lot of things you can do with OCI artifacts now that don't necessarily it could be in here or could not be in here. So I think it kind of depends on what use cases are interesting to solve here. And we can take a look at solutioning those things to kind of fit the use case or what the desire is. But this is something I'd be happy to work on, or happy to help anybody else work on. We're doing a lot of this stuff inside of like our team at Microsoft, but also in SIG release for Kubernetes. We're like looking a lot about how do we generate these things? How do we record the metadata that goes along with that alongside the SBOM, and alongside in that Docker BuildX plugin. There's another piece that I think aligns pretty well with the concept of like what CNCF was looking at and what Porter was looking at about building provenance about the build itself. So we're kind of recording information about where it was built, who it was built by, what inputs went into it. So you could record some of those kind of really specific things to do a little bit more forensic analysis or maybe risk-based assessment on what went into the thing. And that might be another, that's part of SALSA, which is supply software. I can never remember what the acronym is.
SALSA.
Yeah, SLSA.
Okay.
It's supply chain levels for software artifacts. It's a framework for like kind of giving you assurances about the level of security that went into your build. So was this built on Carolyn or Jeremy's laptop, or was this built in a trusted builder like GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps? Which base images, digests, and everything went into it? Which parameters were passed into it? Which tooling was used to build it? Kind of some of that data. I think there's some overlap there between things that were captured in the bundle JSON and maybe some ideas that were originally thought about going in there. These are more common, like not just Porter. These are things that are being adopted kind of broadly across the ecosystem. So that may be another thing to look at kind of in that space.
Oh, thank you.
I had a question and it just like evaporated out of my head completely. So if we wanted to generate an SBOM for Porter, and just for the sake of argument, stuff that extra information in the bundle JSON so that people could see information. Mm-hmm. Like the first thing that came to my mind about what would be useful to people is potentially more information about the assets we copied in. Like we just kind of do like a global copy of a whole bunch of stuff, like whatever's in your bundle directory, right? We copied in. So if you had a Helm chart or whatever, so like we could put that type of information in, or like we could put information in like some of this is already in the bundle.json, but the version of Porter, for example, the version of the mixins, the digest of them, checksums, whatever. Is that the type of info people are putting, or like should it be more detailed? Like these are the libraries that went into the build of the software even?
It can be both. I think there isn't a complete example or a complete set of guidance on like the things that should be in there, but I think all of those are useful informations. I think if you think about the utility of the SBOM, do you remember back like when we started this and people like Joe Beta talked about, or his critique of CNAB was like, I don't know what's in the in the image, right? I think the SBOM kind of helps answer that. It's the things that went inside of it. So it could be the libraries, it could be the files themselves, along with their checksums, so that you can validate that they are what you think they are and they weren't tampered with. This SPDX schema has like a ton of information. The problem with it is a lot of it is optional. So you can leave out a lot of things, you can put in a lot of things, but I think it does give you that level of I don't know, extra kind of transparency that might be useful along with things. And for those things, those things you definitely can build. You can build multiple SBOMs and reference them together too. So you could build an SBOM of, here's the invocation image, and here is all the stuff that we copied into it. Here is the SBOM for the mixin itself when we built the mixin, and reference that. So they don't all have to be like one canonical giant thing. There's a way to reference between them. So you can build, like when you build the mixins, you could generate SBOMs for those things at build time. When you build the invocation image, you could build an SBOM for that and reference those things as well.
Have you seen people, like I've seen a lot of people generating SBOMs and talking about how to generate them. Do you have any experience with like people actually using the SBOM to validate things and make decisions in their pipelines?
I think that's still an area that remains to be seen, how these things are going to be used. So a lot of this was dictated by like, there's an executive order for the US that kind of specifies requirements for people that are going to sell software to the government. And one of the things they have to do is generate an SBOM for these things. Because the tooling is so disparate and not unified right now, like there's a spec, right? But it's very optional. I think we're not quite, we as like the industry aren't quite at a point where we can make like intelligent decisions about things yet. But I think there's gonna be more emerging in that space. So, there's a whole list of things that come along with this. Like, how do you find them? Do you distribute them as OCI artifacts alongside of your bundle? How do you make references between these things and other things? So there's some projects that are kind of emerging in the space to allow you to do, to ingest a lot of these things and then make queries or build relationships between files. So maybe I've got like a scan from a vulnerability scanner like Trivy or something, and it maybe looks for a hash of a layer, and then maybe my SBOM has a hash of a layer, and I can connect those things back and forth. And that's super early. I don't think there's anything in the space yet. I think step one is like people have to start building these things in a reliable way that can be validated, and then the next steps will kind of emerge off of that.
Okay, that's really interesting. I think one thing that could be pretty useful to people immediately that I could see them using out of the SBOM is, you know how the mixins can install client tools for you? It can install Terraform or Helm or kubectl, telling you what's actually in it. Because like, it's not just the mixin itself, like those versions honestly are very static, but knowing that it's actually kubectl 1.26.1 or whatever is way more interesting to people, kind of like what Joe was pointing out 3 years ago. It's been a long road. All right, I have one more question, and this is super naive. I feel like we kind of have one more area where there's not a lot of transparency sometimes about what happened, which is, what did the bundle install? Like a lot of these are talking about build time, but I swear it almost makes sense that one of the outputs of running a bundle, like just how we generate an output that has the logs, right? Like maybe what would be useful would be to generate an output from every bundle that says, this is what I installed. These are the resources I touched. Like this was the subscription ID, or I made 4 VMs and this is what they were, or so, I don't know, something like that, just to get a feel for like, what did it do?
Yeah, so I think that's a different concept than the SBOM, but I think that is
okay.
That is a really cool audit kind of capability that would make even more transparency for those things, especially if you recorded those against like, here is the installation run that I did, or whatever the ID that's associated with that. That would be super, super useful after the fact, right? Whenever I think when you look at like regulated environments and stuff, a lot of times they have pretty legit auditing requirements, but also like whenever you go do kind of any after the fact, like something went wrong, or we had an incident for something, for any reason, like having more of that data for doing kind of those forensics would be super useful.
So are you saying that would be a misuse of SBOMs? It's more like an inspiration to do something different, but it wouldn't.
Yeah, I think it's an inspiration. Okay. I don't know if the format would be the right thing to do, but I think it definitely is an inspiration for it.
Okay. Sorry, I have like just a lot of basic questions about it, because
no.
Like, I've heard about that executive order, and I've heard people say that it's interesting, but I haven't seen any of this in action. So I think I saw Stephen on the call. Stephen, is F5 looking at SBOMs at all?
Not yet, but I'm getting ready to do probably the first part of the year, do quite the Porter Roadshow throughout F5, and that's definitely going to be something that's going to be brought up. We're starting with Nginx, and I'm not sure what applications Nginx has in like government side things, but I know we do have quite a few higher, more secure environments that we will need this kind of information. So it's good to be ahead of this. It hasn't come up yet, but I'm sure it will come up as we start talking about it more.
Okay. And I have one more silly question. So one thing we've talked about quite a bit and has always been on the roadmap for CNAB, but as OCI has evolved, like we were kind of making things up ourselves. And now I feel like the industry actually has real answers for this, is signing. And I'm wondering, like, do these go hand in hand at all? Are the same people interested in it, like using something like cosign to
I think
sign the bundles and invocation images and things like that?
I think that those things give you some kind of like non-repudiation, right? Like you can or verifiability of like who produced it. So the bundle definitely can be signed. All the images that go along with it can definitely be signed. SBOMs can definitely be signed. Like all of these artifacts can be signed. If you look at what SigStore is doing with cosign today, they are definitely like, from the cosign tool, you can sign images, you can sign SBOMs, you can sign provenance files and attach them. It doesn't use the OCI artifact spec yet. On the notary side, they are looking at just kind of generically signing OCI artifacts. And that would be another way that I think would fit here as well. I think it's hard to make a line, because the SigStore side has a ton of adoption and open source projects. I think it's got some adoption on the government side as well, but it's not standards based. The notary stuff is standards based. It's going to have more applicability like across places. Maybe a little bit easier to do things in an air gapped environment, which might be a little more applicable here. But I think, thinking about like way back, all the signing stuff and how confusing it was, and it's way easier now. It's still complicated, but it's way easier now. I think doing these efforts, like looking at SBOMs or just general supply chain artifacts and stuff, I think is useful. I think re-engaging around signing is also something that's super relevant to Porter right now, and they could be done in parallel.
Yeah. Okay.
Because again, I think like you got to think about what the experience looks like for it and kind of work backwards from there. Like, does Porter just by default allow you to pass in a cert and sign? Do you use an external tool to sign things? Because in the end, you're just working with OCI artifacts. I think there's some things to figure out around what that kind of experience looks like.
I mean, just speaking from experience, watching us try to create a specification in CNAB for signing, right? Which I really feel in some ways we were inventing in parallel what a lot of OCI was doing. So maybe worth rethinking some of that, right? Which never actually got accepted and put into the spec, to be clear. It's still not there. And then we tried to implement it with Notary, and I spoke to Shrank often about how we needed things that weren't there yet, that weren't working in Notary, or it worked in V1, but we didn't see a path for it working in V2 and all sorts of stuff. So like, personally, I'm super keen on looking at something that I've seen people have success with and that has a lower barrier to entry, which feels like SigStore and their tools seem to fit that bill. So I'd be really interested in trying to, one, not lock into something. So if someone wanted Notary, you know, a plugin, right? That's always Porter's answer for things.
Plugin model looks.
You know, the default plugin could be the easy mode, you know, path. Maybe it wouldn't work for air gap, like you said, but yeah.
Cool. David, I see you have a hand.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I hate to ask a question, Ron, but I have a hard stop at 30 minutes past. You brought up, Carolyn, the idea of having a manifest of what was written at install time. So like something goes to install something, bundle goes to install something, and you know what it installed. And that I really like that idea. That's a fantastic idea. Is there, like, instead of like knowing it then, is that something that could be, hey, we know this when we package the bundle, and then we check it when it's actually done and made sure that it actually installed the things that it said it installed?
I would say that the bundle would have to be incredibly simplistic to have any insight about the resources that it would even create. A lot of, because you got to remember about bundles is that we let you use existing tools, right? Like Bicep or Terraform or Cloud Formations or whatever, and that can do anything, and we don't have insight into it at build time. But what we could do is ask the tool, when you run, keep track, and we're going to ask for it at the end,
Yeah, I was
but
just
at build time, we don't know. We just don't know. And a lot of it's dynamic. Like if you look at some bundles Ralph has built for other people and things like that, there's a lot of conditions about what it does based on the environment it's in or what it detects in the environment and all sorts of, oh, this already existed, all sorts of stuff that it's very dependent on the conditions of when you install the bundle and where.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Like I hate to poo on it. I really do. But I think that like we'd get very limited utility and probably a lot of like false information, to be honest, about what the bundle is going to do.
I think that's a cool North Star if you could ever head towards that. And figuring out if do you need to make things more declarative and less imperative, or but I think getting to that recording step of what actually happened is a good first step.
I think at the very, very minimum, looking at some of the mix-ins and seeing like what currently support this kind of capability and just adding that as a mix-in feature. I mean, as an exec mix-in, yeah, that's going to be incredibly hard to manage. But as a Terraform mix-in, I mean, this becomes almost simplistic, right? Yep. So like, what can we do at the mix-in level to do this? Because I definitely would like the same kind of thing. I would find that very interesting.
One other thought I had is that as we're working on dependencies, and breaking up these really big bundles that do everything into reusable components. Think about like the Porter explain command. Right now it tells you what parameters to pass and things like that. As I'm working on the prototypes though for dependencies, it's going to tell you, I'm going to make a Redis cache. I'm going to need a MySQL database. I'm going to need this. And it's going to tell you, I'm going to reuse the MySQL database and I'm going to make the Redis cache and things like that. So some of this information we may be able to get not from the mixin itself, but how the author structured the bundle and created little mini building blocks inside that kind of represent the resources and services that it wants to create and use. If that makes sense. And we got big dreams. Oh my goodness. You know how long it would take just to just to do what we talked about here?
We need about 30 more people working on this.
Well, go find them. Come on, Sue. So who all is interested in trying to move the SBOM part forward? Because as Jeremy said, I feel like it can go in parallel. It's not really dependent on signing or anything else, really. If we wanted to start on it now, if someone was interested, we could just jump on it.
What would that look like? Would we do a PEP? Are they PEPs?
Yeah.
Porter enhancement?
Yeah, we have PEPs. They're not terribly formal. They're not like CAPs at all, but you know. Yeah. So usually like we start with a HackMD or something, and then when we have enough of idea that we're like, we want other people outside of maybe the 2 or 3 who's working really closely on it to know what's going on and solicit feedback, we would turn it into a PEP. They're not like a one shot, like you put it in there when it's an idea and it's committed and you can reference it and kind of try to lure people in to work with you on it. And then just kind of get feedback as you evolve your plan and start working on it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to start something along those lines.
Great.
So I can start HackMD and start capturing some thoughts. Danny from my team might be interested in helping out as well, so I'll ping him and ask if he wants to do some open source. So I think this would be a fun place to.
Oh man, that'd be great, especially because so much of this is in a greenfield part of Porter that you don't need to like understand a lot of the legacy garbage code. You can just jump in and write new stuff without a lot of context, which means you'll be able to work a lot faster.
Yeah, so I'll start a HackMD and then I'll drop a link into the Porter channel if anybody else wants to collaborate.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool. Do we have more questions for the SBOMs? If not, we can move on to the Porter data services for output. I think, Steve, you are working on this one?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Planning on getting started on this, and we just put the PEP out for it here yesterday, a couple days ago. We haven't actually got any more movement on it, so it's more about a discussion on what we want it to look like at this point.
Do you mind if I pull up that document you'd sent me the other day about it?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, let's see if I can find it now. There it is. There we go. Yeah, so this one is the beginning of a PEP to be able to surface information about what outputs the bundle generated and be able to get that information easily from the operator from inside Kubernetes. I don't know, Steve, if you wanted to walk through this. I just want to pull it up so people could see it and we can get the link in the notes.
Yeah, this is more of a brain dump than anything else. There's going to be some iterations on here, but we're thinking about, because the use case that we have, and we've talked about it, is we have the Porter operator running inside of a cluster. A developer comes along and installs some Porter bundle. We want to be able to show them what the outputs are from that bundle without them having to, they don't have access to the cluster. So we need a way to expose that externally. We've got an API that fronts this cluster that we can proxy things to. The way we're doing things now is we actually run a custom agent action in the cluster that does a Porter outputs installation show or list or whatever it is. And then we just parse the job logs text. And then we can grab the outputs that way. But that's not great long term. And we looked into this, and there really wasn't a much better way than the operator itself basically doing the exact same thing, just parsing these job log texts. So that's kind of what's driving this feature right now. And we talked about what kind of service internally. Probably going to be looking at a gRPC service for this, and then really limiting the scope initially to only expose related to installation outputs. There may be other use cases down the road. Another thing we were thinking about is like, does this have an application outside of the operator? Would we want to run this like, say, as a systemd service on a server that would be able to expose some Porter functionality to an API? So that's kind of, we're not sure what that would look like.
Mohammed, I want to tag you in here because when you first suggested a gRPC service for Porter, it was actually outside of the entire context of the operator. So I don't know if you wanted to discuss some of the other ways that you saw we could use a Porter service. Trying to find, there was like a great picture and everything. Yeah, there we go. So the idea was that you could have Porter as a gRPC service and things like VS Code, for example. Our VS Code extension could be a lot smarter and be able to show you a lot more information about what Porter is currently doing or what it just did when it ran, show you installations, things like that, and just generally inspect Porter's database and make it visual for you. Mohammed, are you interested in talking about the service in general, not just like for retrieving outputs? Put this in the notes in case anyone's interested.
Yeah, this is a good breakdown of like what beyond the operator use case might be useful, because we also we have our own VS Code plugin or extension that we wrote for our API that kind of does some of the same things, but it does this through talking to our APIs directly. So if we've been talking about how do we move this over to just do Porter, but if we could do it through a service, that would be, I think, a lot more useful on our end.
I'm sorry, I'm literally sprinkling cat treats on the floor to get my cat to be quiet for the rest of this meeting.
Does that work
I have no
for
shame.
toddlers too?
It does. Just throw Cheerios at him. Give him a little cup with the Cheerios. Yeah. That's how I babysit. Okay. I had read this over and I think my biggest questions, but you kind of answered it. It sounds like this is missing that limiting scope we had talked about last time. About we have like an internal service and then something a lot more usable and stable for users to interact with, like GraphQL, for example.
Right.
Yeah, I think we just mentioned that. It's like that's out of scope. I think that would get us pretty far, and you could just submit this as a PR, to the proposals repo.
Sure. Yeah. So this will be just basically the first iteration is just going to be that internal service, gRPC to gRPC. And we're not going to try to expose this as a more complicated GraphQL or REST API, but that could be on the roadmap for this. Like, let's just get that internal outputs service set up.
Yeah, and I think one other thing I was interested in understanding is what's always tricky, and Porter has two ways to answer this question, is what is the value of some output after a bundle is run, right? And there's two ways to ask that in Porter's command line tool. One is, give me the last one you have in the database, which is a moving target. And then the other is, what was the value after a particular run that I did? It may be interesting to think about for the output CRD, if it could be associated to an individual agent action.
Is there
Does
a
that make
way
sense?
to, is there a way to associate historical run of an installation with the state of the outputs at that time? Does that get stored off in the database?
Yeah.
Okay. So we
Yeah.
can actually, we could query that in some way.
Yeah, we may need to do a little bit extra to get the run ID. I don't know if that's 100% exposed to the operator, but
Sure.
Basically when the agent action runs and we actually kick off Porter, Porter assigns a unique ID to that run and then has a whole bunch of information associated with it. Like, for example, what parameters did you pass for this specific run, right? Because over time, the installation CRD changes and may have specified different parameters. But you do get a snapshot of like, what were the inputs to that run and what were the outputs and what were the logs, etc. So
Okay. I would say, I mean, for a MVP, like just getting the latest value out of the database and then just design it in a way that it's flexible enough to support, potential run IDs in the future.
Yeah. I think like that sounds great. Like do an endpoint that does latest first, but keep a wiggle room for being able to have another endpoint that's specific to a particular run.
Yeah, and then so I mean we're trying to think on like how does this become useful inside the operator? Like how do we actually now the operator can hit a gRPC, like the controller after an installation has finished can go hit a gRPC endpoint and get information about that installation. What do we do with it from there, right? Like, and we were thinking the installation output CRD, because then we were talking about this before, but again, the problem is the operator would be ingesting and parsing job logs, which is not great. So you'd made a comment about the output CRD and whether or not we want to also store things off inside or in the key vault or secret store associated to the Porter config for the operator.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with how much Kubernetes is advanced with secrets and integrating with like external secret stores like Key Vault or Azure Vault, or I don't know, name the cloud vault. But I was curious if we've reached a point in Kubernetes where I could create a secret and store data in it, and instead of the data being stored in plain text in etcd, in the clusters database, the secret is persisted actually in whatever secret store is backing secrets for that cluster. I may have just invented a feature that I really want. I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something already in the works for something like that, or maybe it exists. So maybe just be interesting to see, because then Porter doesn't have to try to awkwardly tell you where to find the secret, or trust that it's okay to put sensitive data in a CRD, which I would say isn't okay in a production system. But yeah, I don't know enough about Kubernetes for that.
I'm trying to think on what that would look like with our use case as well, where we would have, say, a single massive shared Porter operator instance that would be shared by potentially hundreds of developers that want to be able to they want to be able to just run a bundle and get an output, and I don't want them necessarily to be using some kind of shared Azure Key Vault to fetch these outputs, because then you could definitely expose outputs to other developers, because one of the issues with Azure Key Vault specifically is there is no secret level RBAC, so you'd have to have like every single installation would need its own key vault created to store the outputs for that installation if you wanted to have resource or secrets isolation. That's specifically with the key vault example. I think the HashiCorp Vault has a better way to manage access to secrets, but I'm not sure. I think that's a good use case. I don't know about the restriction on it though.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not sure either. I just you know, we've worked really hard to not have Porter leak secret sensitive data or copy sensitive data out of a canonical location like a secret store and having it end up somewhere else as well. And right now, when you run Porter and it generates a sensitive output, it gets stored back in that secret store like Key Vault or HashiCorp Vault or something like that. And maybe it makes sense, or I would feel more comfortable from a security standpoint, that the output says, hey, this is secret. This is where you can go get that data, you know, and maybe we give you a vault path. But we don't give you that secret. You have to have access to the location where that secret is, you know, and just go get it yourself, which isn't a great UX, but it really lessens like the possibility that we just end up exposing secrets that is a big problem for the project and users.
Okay.
So just something to think about. Like we need to have a solid story around security and, you know, what's the impact if we do end up storing unencrypted secret values in those CRDs?
Sure. Yeah. Because I mean, that kind of undermines a lot of the security work that you're trying to have those be as a first-class citizen in Porter.
Yeah. And I mean, some of it is maybe people just opt into it, you know, like I was suggesting actually we opt into synchronizing outputs in general, because in a lot of other installations of operator that I'm aware of that people want to do, they're actually not interested in outputs at all. So that would lessen how many pieces of data we're creating that no one's using, right? And it kind of removes that question altogether for some people. And otherwise people could say, yeah, I want the outputs and I want you to just give me the sensitive data in the output versus just give me a path to where to find it, or don't, you know, something like that, some other alternative behavior.
Make a conscientious decision to be insecure at this time, secure by default.
Yeah, and just make it explicit instead of trying to pick some default that I think is going to make everyone unhappy. So is there anything else you need or you're looking for feedback on, or is it just you'd like to maybe just get to the point where you can submit this PEP as a PR and we can start thinking about implementation? Yeah,
I think we're trying to figure out when we're going to plan out the scope of work, and it's probably going to be for the first part of the year. So we actually have some other stuff going on that we might need some feedback on, non-related to this. So this is, we want to get some feedback on this PEP and get it submitted. And really, I want to limit the scope as much as possible. Like, what's the smallest feature we can actually do for this that satisfies the use case? So I guess if there's additional use cases because I'm only thinking about the F5 use case. That's the only thing I can wrap my mind around right now. So if there's other people that can think of, you know, why would you use a output service or a data service in Porter, you know, please speak up and give me that feedback so I can make sure it's covered when we go to do this.
Yeah. And I think part of limiting the scope is that this isn't really a quote unquote public feature that's ready for end users. It's really for us integrating with other things like Operator or integrating with the VS Code extension. And I think within reason, obviously we don't drag that out for years, but it gives us, you know, a couple months or something where we can try things out and prototype before we get locked into whatever,
Yeah.
service we ended up making. So if there's nothing else for the output service, we don't have enough time, but so some other time we can talk about dependencies, and there's a couple things I was hoping to chat about there. One was using dependencies in air-gapped environments. The PEP doesn't really address that very well. And I think there's a lot of nuance around what we're going to need to be able to do to support that properly. And then, all this stuff that's happened with Mastodon becoming really popular. A couple of people have suggested like, oh, it'd be so cool if like there was just one bundle and you could run it on, pick a cloud, doesn't matter. And it would just magically set up Mastodon for you and use the appropriate things from that cloud provider. And I feel like that's something we haven't talked about much. And I'd love to kind of start a conversation about is, can we write a single bundle and have it work using dependencies to be able to be deployable to any cloud? So I could write a Mastodon bundle, point it at AWS, and it uses the appropriate as a services and things for AWS. And I could do the same thing, point at DigitalOcean or Azure or Google, and just be able to use that one bundle as opposed to a bundle per cloud provider. Like, I don't think the dependencies PEP goes far enough to make that possible. So it'd be nice to just start thinking about that and understanding if that's silly and only cool for demoware, or if people would honestly be interested in a portable bundle essentially across infrastructure. So maybe next time we can chat about that some more.
I think
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna mention that I actually maybe yesterday found the issue, Caroline, that you opened in 2001 that talks exactly about whether we want to do the writing a single bundle and deploy it to any cloud.
Oh, nice. If you find that, can you put a link in?
Yeah. I will do that.
Yeah. Evidently, I keep having the same idea and then gain amnesia. So,
well, I mean, we've done the same thing too in like some of our Terraform stuff where we have like a clouds directory, and then at runtime you can actually specify. It's like I want to install AWS, and you've got a shell script that actually goes into the clouds directory and copies over that Terraform and drops it in your main Terraform directory. So this is definitely something that we've been interested in the past.
Okay.
I can't think of a direct use case that I have right now for it, but I know that like I said, once I start doing this Porter Roadshow, getting some of these, Nginx SMEs in front of Porter and having them write Porter bundles, they're going to be like, well, how can I do this really advanced thing? And I'll be like, I don't know. So
yeah. I think one thing I would be really interested in seeing is, I don't know if you're familiar with like the CNCF artifact hub, where people can share images or configurations, manifests, Helm charts, things like that for CNCF projects. I would love to see Artifact Hub support bundles. And then I think this is where it would be really useful, is that you could put out bundles basically for a lot of CNCF projects and tools and things like that. And if they were capable of having one bundle, but you could deploy it to a whole bunch of different vendors or clouds, I think that would be much lower overhead and effort if you were hoping that people would make these building blocks that then other people could start building on top of. Because if you have to say I'm some CNCF project and I make a thing and make a bundle, but I have to support every single thing individually, you're like, wow, that's a lot of work and I don't care enough about bundles for that. But if you could make one and then other people can riff on it and make a whole bunch of other things on top of it, and then these bundles are capable of targeting multiple clouds just kind of built in, I think that could help us build an ecosystem where people are sharing bundles. Because right now, you know, I'm gonna be honest, most bundles are very specific to what people are doing because of the lack of dependencies and building blocks at the moment. So I think there are more people who would use it. I don't know if it's going to be individual companies. It may be more tailored to trying to get devs to write lower level things like a you know, a Redis bundle and an Nginx bundle and things like that. All right. Well, I think that's all I have to say about that. I'll be quiet until next time.
I think we have like 3 minutes left. So does anyone have more questions or things that they would like to point it out? Maybe we can add it onto the agenda for next time. But otherwise, I think this is it.
One thing, Carolyn, we are tasked with writing a white paper that F5 publish around how we're using Porter to solve some problems. So I would love to get any kind of like cool official pictures or diagrams or anything, you know, pretty that you might have in your Porter marketing that we could throw into that white paper that we're going to be putting out.
I love that you think that we have marketing.
Well, I mean, somebody made the cat, right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was Ronan who made the cat for us. If you give me an idea of the types of diagrams you're interested, I can tell you if I've made them myself locally, because that's basically all of our assets, is I may have put something together for a blog post or internally talking to someone or my own road shows that I've done. And I can let you know if I have something you can reuse if you just give me a direction. Yeah.
Yeah. Once we have some content around what we're going to be doing, I'll ping you on that. It's going to be initially related to how we're using it for Nginx, and we're going to be building a bundle for the Nginx reference architecture for the Kubernetes ingress controller, and that's probably going to be the subject of the white paper.
Cool. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, anything that you might have that we could throw in there that's like, oh, Porter, it's a cat, and so
yeah,
I'll ping you and maybe even get some feedback on it once we have some initial content out there.
Sure. And if you ever just need pictures of the Porter cat in a whole bunch of different assets, the community repository on Git Porter has all of the graphics that Ronan made for us.
Yeah, we stole one of the pictures. Our internal project name is Vulcan, and we grabbed a cat and then photoshopped it to have the Vulcans, like holding up the Vulcan sign. So
I love it. All right, cool. Thanks, everybody.
All right, have a good day.
All right, bye.